On Grady Hill by Brent Noury. Read by Brent Noury. Chapter 6. Astrid and Samuel. Thank you, Mrs. Haven. Titus and Mrs. Haven made many of that same trip you did this morning, children, from Gentry Ford to Utopia, as the railroad was being built. Miss Haven is responsible for all them wildflowers you see along the way. They ain't so wild, you know. Miss Adelaide dashed a whole bunch of beauty into our mountainside. Some say that's why the Mountain of Dreams sent Titus there that night, or both nights. Anyways, back in the cabin, where we are now, in the room, Samuel laid there with a broken leg and beaten face and ribs. We were alone, besides Mama Heather in the back area, always listening. When she spoke up, it was like a gale wind, we'd say. Horse shit mountain, I could hear her whispering now. Anyhow, Samuel and I was in the room together. This was the first time we'd ever really been alone in a room as adults. He sat by the fire there and glared at me like a Grady can look down on Haven. I wished to tell him everything then in that moment. His green eyes stared at me through the swelling of his face. We were in silence. He spoke. I hate this town. You don't hate much, Samuel. Least of all this town. How would you know what I think about this town? She knows more than you think, boy. Mama Heather would pipe up and usually be on my side about such things. Every time I go down to this town, bad things happen. Nobody seems to understand what they're doing. And you don't know what you're doing. You thought buying all the good help on Mountainside was going to make friends? It made all townside farmers pissed and thinking of you as a rich boy, the next Charleston. Jem Montaneau is dead. I needed the labor. As guys have been slipping to Winston these past years, the farm is burned. There's no workers. 'Cause your daddy, Brick Haven, set a boycott on me and Grady Farm. Papa didn't start no fire. And Titus is good at setting things. He'll figure out your farm. He's on his way up hillside right now. After a long pause waiting for Titus to show, Samuel reiterated, I hate this town. Every time I go down, it's bad news. There's only one reason to go to town. Miss Astrid? I was sort of lost in thought at this moment. Miss Astrid. Yes? Why did you come up here to check on me? To check on you? Yes. To check on you? Yes. But why? Are you a dope asking questions like that? Mama Heather galled again. You took a beating, Samuel. I was concerned for you, and in fact, Mrs. Heather as well. Thank you, darling, Mrs. Heather from the back room. Oh yeah, I got a beating. How's Tom doing? He's screaming a lot more than you are. You don't mess with Big Bill's son, Mama galled. You won't be able to come downtown for a bit, as is. 2 reasons, I suppose. I could help out with that if you needed, Samuel. And Miss Heather. Thank you, darling. So I can make the trek up hillside for you, Samuel. What do you need from town? Well, 2 things, I suppose. Like oats and flour and sugar and the mail. That's 4 things. That's 1 thing. Okay, what's the other? Astrid Haven. Yes. No, that's it. Astrid Haven is what I want from town. Samuel had said it, and I knew what he meant. And I suppose that was the real beginning for the 2 of us. I would make trips to town for him and Mrs. Heather, and we'd have our visits, and he'd recuperate. It was then I learned of his years on Hilltop while Jem was aging and the struggles on Farmside. I wish I could say things got better around town, but after the fight, it was all disarray. Rumors of Grady Farm and all of Harship being sold was everywhere. Folks was looking at the toughest winter ever. The truth is, Samuel was looking to sell the farm and mountain, and I was privy to the whole development. Gentry and Ford had made offers for parts of Backside. They didn't have enough money to counter Charleston for his offers for the whole mountain. It was all of Mountainside or nothing for Winston. He knew Grady's was in a real bind, and winter would probably starve them out. Gentry and Ford had plans for a small town on the backside of Harship. A railroad was set to be built through Backside and towards Winston Charleston's land. Samuel's injuries were his easiest torment during this time. He knew what would happen if Winston Charleston got his hands on the land. He knew what Gentry Ford could offer was just enough to survive, and he'd be losing the most valuable tended land. It would be enough for winter, maybe a year, but not much more without help from town. Samuel was able to start walking again without crutch. But with that lifelong pain in his leg, he'd use that there walking cane in the corner for trips up and down hillside and making way around town and up farmside. Samuel needed help for the fields up topside to be plowed and cropped. Grady Farm at one point had been a big supplier to the town, always was with Big Bill. Charleston was like a disease on the land, pitting workers against interests and so forth. Bill had always supplied lumber and all that Grady Farm had to offer to lots of mountainside folk, and good work. In their own spite, and under the harsh conditions for work as Charleston bought up more and more of town, the townsfolk had locked the poor Gradys up on Hilltop, frozen out, in a wintry tower of ice, with only a beating heart to escape. End of chapter 6.